All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about Vineyard Establishment and how to prepare the site for a new vineyard. So this is for Viti 300, Intro to Viticulture and Enology, and of course this follows along with Chapter 5 of the Grape Grower's Handbook. So if you'd like to learn more and get into more depth, definitely read that chapter. It'll be a good resource for you. All right, overview. So vineyard establishment requires a lot of careful planning, right? It's very expensive. It takes a long time to do the work. And then in addition to that, it takes even longer until you actually see the literal fruits of your labor come into play, right? But if you have a property, you have a site, you've selected it there, and you've determined that this is a good idea, there are many steps involved in actually preparing the site before you plant the grapes. So we're talking about this for the rest of this presentation. So we're going to talk about clearing the site, soil analysis, and that involves texture, nutrients, and structure, weed control, and then also drainage evaluation of your site. So land clearing seems pretty straightforward, but is a lot of work. Essentially, it's the removal of excess undesirable vegetation or debris from a site. So this includes any trees, shrubs, stumps, logs, or extremely large rocks. You're going to need some heavy-duty equipment to move this. You'll probably have to hire a crew, or unless you can operate the equipment and rent it yourself, that will most likely be what is best. You should also map out and identify any intermittent streams, surface water runoff channels, and steep slopes such as ravines. This will impact what you might want to work with for your vineyard and what you might want to leave for the ecosystem to keep it healthy and happy, right? What you want to leave and not disturb. Okay, soil analysis. So once you've cleared the land, then this is your time to really take soil samples, see what you have, and then make any major adjustments before you proceed any further. Right, so you should test the season before you plant, so that way you have time to make any corrections for nutrition deficiencies, pH, or anything else, right? It is important to note that your soil analysis doesn't always correlate with tissue analysis, so there's shortcomings to just measuring the nutrients that are present in the soil, and it would be difficult to tell what the nutrients that are actually being absorbed by the plant with a tissue sample if you aren't already growing any vines on that property, right? So you're just going to have to take the information that you can, which is just the soil at the time. For soil nutrient analysis, you're looking at the major nutrients that would be utilized by grapevines. So nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. As far as I know, any soil labs will give you your analysis, but they will also provide a healthy range of what is best for your soil as well. So you can look up that information, or they'll give it to you. You'll also want to understand the soil texture you have, and then take a look at the level of soil compaction of your site and how capable it is of draining that water and where that water is draining to, right? One of my favorite examples is there was a local vineyard who was next to a golf course, and they would often receive free irrigation on their block because the golf course was uphill. So all the drainage from all of the sprinklers that were watering the green for the golfing area came down into their vineyard, and then those vines received probably more water than they needed, but that was just where they planted the vines and where the water drained, so that was how that worked. So understanding all of these components is a very big deal. You would need to sample the soil in your area, so depending on the size of your vineyard, you're going to need more samples for a larger space versus less samples of a smaller space, right? Within a single space of a vineyard, you could collect up to 20 subsamples from each depth using a soil probe or a shovel. If you're taking a core sample, 12 to 16 inches is very typical for vineyard sampling. I know that grapevine roots grow below 16 inch or well below it. However, any soil amendments are very difficult to do past 16 inches, so that information won't be very helpful for you in that aspect. if you are like trenching a hole or like digging a soil pit to see the horizons and understand a plot for the bigger picture, that is kind of like a different situation. That is like the big picture of the soil of your vineyard versus just the sample, right? But you can definitely pull samples from that soil pit, right? Once you get your samples, you're going to want to put them into a bucket and mix them very well. You'll fill a soil sample bag and send it to reputable soil testing company, of course, right? So that can be very helpful. As far as what can be like inhibiting your vineyard and some like physical limits to the growth of agriculture, there can be a lot of different things kind of working against you. So physical limitations include stratified soils, clay pan soils, hard pan soils, plow pan, and also clay rich soils. I have a picture of plow pan on this side. So plow pan is basically a compacted layer of soil below the reach of repeatedly tilled soils in agriculture. So say this is the maximum reach of 16 inches. So what you can see is that you have a really nice section of root growth right here from the plant down to the 16th inch. But after that, it's just completely hard panned where the water can't penetrate. It stays sealed there. The pores are so tight that it doesn't allow for any root growth or drainage. It's very compacted. So this is a plow pan, right? So not ideal. You also have stratified, which is our next slide. Stratified soil will have horizons with abrupt changes in soil texture. There's nothing wrong with horizons, but if there are very abrupt changes with like a high concentration of like 100% pure clay or rocks or something else, right? This can really affect the drainage and root penetration, but also the ability for the roots to reach any air as well. So not ideal for growing plants. As you can see in this section, we just have grass with very short roots. It'd be very difficult for anything to reach farther below this. If you do have stratified soils on your site, you can fix it by slip, moldboard, or disc plows. The textbook has pictures of these plows and goes into depth about their mechanics and how they work. If you'd like to learn more about that, definitely check out the textbook. It's a fantastic resource, right? It is important to note that you cannot just subsoil the stratified soils, because subsoiling, or also known as ripping, is designed to just fracture and break it up, but not actually mix it. So if you were to fracture stratified soils, it would actually just naturally flow back into its layers or its horizons, right? It would not actually mix it up to create a uniformity, so that way the roots can penetrate deeper and they can be healthier and there'd be better water drainage, right? So it's important to know that that's not the same thing and it would not be effective. Okay. Clay pan soils is very much a similar concept, where it's just it's a very abrupt increase in clay content within a short vertical distance in a soil horizon. So clay is very effective at holding water, right? It has the finest particles of all the different types of soil, and so it holds on to a lot of water because of that surface area. However, not very good for drainage, right? Limits aeration and root growth, and oddly enough, clay pan soils normally happen near the surface of soil. So to fix this, you'll need to moldboard, plow, or disc plow. Again, break up that pan, mix it into a different type of soil below it, introduce some organic matter or something with more richness and airflow of the soil, and then you should be able to amend that soil in that area. But not ideal. Very similar to this is hard pan soils. So instead of a pan from clay being formed, it's the silica and hard water is coming together to cement soil particles. So it's an absolute barrier to water drainage and root penetration. Ideally, vineyards should not be planted on hard pan soils unless the layer is shallow gypsum and creates improved drainage for removal of salts, sodium, or excess water. So that's where your soil testing will come into play, and you can see if that's going to work for you or work against you, right? Awesome. And you can also see from this picture that the roots don't really go below this hard pan surface interface. Okay, so it's time to basically subsoil or rip your property, right? You're going to want to do this because it will loosen up the soil, provide aeration. It'll also be easier to plant your vines as well because the soil is kind of loose, right? It's easier to work with. It'll also be a time for you to introduce nutrients if you need to, right? It'll help water infiltration and all that wonderful stuff. It's important to know that there are certain times of year to subsoil, right? If the soil is more on the dry side, it mixes up and breaks more readily. So effectiveness of subsoiling depends on soil water content. The ideal content of water for different types of soils are the following. So for clay, 10%, loam, 5%, and for sand, 2.5% water. So it's important that you do this in the late fall, either due to sufficient rainfall, so the soil is just wet enough from some rain in late fall, or late spring because it's dried out sufficiently to those percentages, because this is the only time the soil will actually fracture correctly and yield fine fragments for good root penetration, right? It's very important. It's also important to know whether or not you have a water table below your vineyard. If you do, if it's less than 6 feet from the surface, your vineyard may never dry sufficiently, right? There's just too much water there. Okay, so what depth should you subsoil? It really depends on your goals, right? There are a couple of different factors to consider. So one is the depth of your ripper shanks and the distance between your ripper shanks. So you are breaking up the soil to increase aeration, root penetration, water flow, all these wonderful things, right? So these claws are digging into the earth and breaking up any compaction and loosening the soil. So the length of the claw is the depth of the ripper shank, and the distance between them is just the distance between the claws, right? General rules for success, according to the textbook, are that shanks penetrate the soil 1.5 times the depth of the targeted soil problems. So say you have a clay pan that's 5 inches below the surface, then you'd want to target for 7.5, right? 7.5 inches. And you could even round up to 8, I guess, if you really wanted to, right? That's just an example. And that's just because there could be some variation. It might not all be uniform, but the sample you took could be on the lower end, and there could be some higher ones too, right? So deeper is most always better. The distance between the shanks should be equal to or preferably less than the desired ripping length, right? So if your ripping length is 10 inches, then the distance between your shanks should not be more than 10 inches, right? That's just how it'll work for the ability to break up the soil, right? You're not trying to like cut it like a brownie pan. You're trying to disturb the soil and create that aeration, right? It's also important to know that rip in one direction with narrowly spaced shanks rather than 2 directions with wide shank spacing, right? So keeping narrow is much more effective. And then also ripping in one direction with narrow spacing is also more effective than wide spacing and cross ripping. So just because you do it in a cross doesn't mean it's okay. Keeping it more narrow will be much more effective at creating that ripping process. So just some fun tools for success, right? Okay, moving on. So you at this point you understand you've cleared your site, you understand the soil, you have prepared the soil, right? As soon as you prepare that soil, like new plants and weeds will inevitably come into your site, right? So it's important that you have a handle on your weed control and how to manage your weeds, right? So weeds are a problem because not only are they a huge nuisance, like star thistle. If you ever tried working on star thistle, it pokes you. It's very hard to get rid of, and it spreads very quickly, and it's just a huge pain in everyone's legs, literally. And it gets very tall. So star thistle is a problem just because of the pain and the nuisance. Otherwise, weeds generally compete for water and nutrients, which is not fantastic, right? Weeds are not the same as cover crop. Cover crop is a chosen plant that will benefit the soil, nutrients, and overall health and productivity of your grapevines, right? This is something that's just taking up space and not contributing to the growth of your vineyard. This is something that's just existing and using up nutrients and not helping, essentially, right? So to encourage the survival of newly planted young vines and to hasten their growth, weeds generally must be suppressed, right? So you have a couple different options. You can manage weeds without herbicides, and for that, it's a lot of tilling. So when you till when the soil is dry, it can break up the roots and dry out the plants and kill them. However, this needs to be done multiple times a year and can be extremely labor and time intensive. If you're going to manage with herbicides, you can use a pre-emergent or post-emergent. Pre-emergent will prevent weeds from germinating, so they will prevent them from actually spawning roots and then becoming plants. Post-emergent is something that kills weeds that are currently existing in your vineyard, right? There's a million different products and a million different approaches to this. There's also biodynamic and methods, which include bringing in baby doll sheep or goats to eat these things, and that's another non-herbicide approach to managing weeds, right? So you have options. There could be lots of conversations about that, but ultimately just decide what's best for your site and what's best for you. Okay, and that brings us to number 3, which is site drainage. Site drainage is very, very important. If you've ever had a yard with plants, you've had to take care of plants before, waterlogging is a huge problem. So the best way to not get waterlogged vines is to make sure that your site has good drainage, right? So a lot of repetitive information here. Drainage is important because it supports healthy root function, prevents root suffocation or drowning, as I like to say, so oxygen is critical, reduces disease pressure in wet soils, protects soil structure from compaction, and allows early season equipment access, and improves grape quality and uniformity, right? So as you can see, this looks like early spring, wherever this was, and it looks like we had a very large rainfall, and now we can see this huge puddle down the center of the vineyard, right? So this would be a section that does not have good site drainage. Generally, when you see a pooling of water, it's not ideal, right? So, drainage. If your site doesn't have naturally well-drained soil, you may have to install artificial drainage pathways, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just redirecting the water so that way it is able to evacuate the soil and it can move on its way to a different system, right? So we can do that. So here we have an image of a vineyard with a water table and a redirection of the drainage. We have here controlling soil moisture helps your cover crop develop a deep, healthy root system, which is very ideal. We want deep root systems for longer lasting vines. Deeper roots allow for greener, healthier plants that produce higher yields. Laterals control the height of the water table and remove excess moisture that can damage roots, right? So you have a water table here. Here on this top layer, we have rich, healthy soil with good drainage. And below, where we've installed these artificial drainage pathways, we have saturated soil. So the water is literally just sitting in the soil. Mains are the backbone of your system. They will carry excess water away from your field, right? It's a wonderful thing. It is important to know, if you use pesticides or things like that, if this is going to be leaching into your water drainage, that's going to be a whole nother conversation. something to consider, because you don't want that drainage to go into a stream with another ecosystem and other like animals and plants, and potentially be poisonous to them, right? That's a whole nother environmental conversation. Okay, how to determine if your vineyard site needs drainage. If you see persistent puddles or soggy soil after rain, that water is having a hard time draining, right? If you see uneven vine growth or delayed bud break, it could be because they're holding on to excess water. Poor vigor or chronic disease in low spots of your vineyard could be because all the water is sitting and draining there. Also, if it's hard to access rows after rainfall because the soil is muddy and soft, it's because it's not draining appropriately and it's difficult to walk around on. So those are good signs. If you need drainage, there are some options, right? So you can install a subsurface drainage, which is also known as a French drain or a tile drain, especially in areas with perched water tables or impermeable soil layers. It's just like kind of this little little ditch here that goes through. They developed a drain. It'll go down and out through the vineyard this way, right? You can also use surface contouring or ditches to guide excess water away from vines and reduce ponding in certain areas. If you have not planted your vineyard already, you can amend the soil texture or structure. So you can incorporate organic matter or sand to improve infiltration in heavy clay soils. Ripping and subsoiling can help break up compacted layers to encourage better water movement and also root penetration. So all the above, wonderful things. Ultimately, you're going to get some compaction in your vineyard where the tractor drives through, but ideally the root zone and the surrounding areas should be still pretty permeable. Okay, and that brings us to our student learning objectives. This presentation was a little bit shorter than some of our other ones. Like I said, the textbook went more into detail with the different types of plows. If you'd like to learn more about that, you're welcome to look into it. I'm going to leave that information for like an internship or an in-person experience, because I think it would be helpful to see it in person and understand why the viticulturist chose a specific type for their plot. So yes, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.